My body language is even in now our greeting. But if you're listening to the podcast, you have no idea what we're doing. But go look at a YouTube video if you ever want a good laugh. Hey, girl, what's up?
Hey, girl. Oh, I'm so excited again. I mean, I feel like I always say I'm excited, but I'm like, man, this season just keeps getting better and better and better and better with all the story and the feedback and the text, every DM, every person that hits us up. And, the thing I love is like, people aren't saying like, oh, good job, you launched your podcast. Like, no, like people are pouring their hearts out and they are sending text messages of how much the stories of our guests are just touching their lives. And I believe that we went into this thinking reconciliation might mean something different or look a different way. But the stories of our guests are causing so much reflection, breaking down so many walls, so many chains, giving language to people that are having similar experiences. And we're seeing reconciliation happen all over already. And girl, God is just so faithful. Oh, so faithful, E.
Talk about it. And speaking of faithful, today's guest is all about faithfulness and the faithfulness of God in her life. She is one of my dear friends. I'm so excited to introduce her. I've been like giddy all day because y'all, before I even tell you who she is, y'all know I moved to Florida. I was struggling with that decision. I had to leave really incredible and just wonderful life doing friends in Portland and came to Florida.
Me, of course.
Well, I was about to say you, and words escaped me because I just said life doing friends. So whatever that means. But anyway, I left really good community, and I prayed and I prayed and prayed that God would give us good community as we moved to Florida. And today you get to meet one of the answers, it's going to make me cry, to God's prayer in John and I's life. And so, you guys, I would love for us to welcome Faith Corley. Hi.
So glad to have you on this podcast. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to do the awkward moment and introduce you formally. So I'm going to read your bio to start. So I'm going to just dive in. Faith is married to her husband, Alex, and is mom to 3 young boys, ages 3, 6, and 8. Whew, girl, I pray for you. Born in the Midwest, Faith moved to the Southeast Coast for college and never left. A former board-certified music therapist, mental health counselor, and director in higher education, Faith has spent the last few years focused on being a full-time mom. She currently teaches music part-time at her son's school, serves on the board of a local nonprofit, and helps lead a group of moms at her church. Faith enjoys yoga, tennis, the beach, making music, reading, speaking Espanol, and traveling. Growing up in the church, her faith has been shaped greatly by the godly people he's put into her community and throughout the years. Her hope in Jesus is what has sustained her through some of the darkest seasons of her life. So good. So good.
I get the pleasure and honor of telling a little bit of Faith's story to you guys as well, because I know her and she is my friend. And I've gotten to the funniest thing about Faith is when Faith and I first hung out, like we know each other through our boys, because my middle son, Kai, and her middle son, Everett, are besties, like best buds. And so I would like stalk Faith at the preschool because I wanted her to be my friend. And then finally, I don't remember who it was, Faith, but one of us worked up the nerve to like say, hey, we should hang out sometime. And y'all, I went for a walk with Faith on the beach. And it is no wonder that she's still friends with me to this day, because we went for a walk. I talked the entire time. And then we got done with the walk. And I said, all right, it was nice hanging out with you. And we parted ways. And I texted her and I said, I am so sorry that I just talked the whole time. She goes, oh, it's okay. I'm a licensed therapist. So I'm used to that.
Used to be.
Oh yeah.
But now you get to know her story, or at least if you still don't know it, now you get to tell a little bit of it.
So I am honored and happy that I did eventually listen to Faith's story, and I get to tell you a little bit about Faith's story before we dive in to get to know her a little bit better today. So Faith was born and raised in Southern Illinois, and she grew up in a family where her parents had a bit of a strained relationship that greatly affected her growing up, and especially as the youngest child. Challenging her father's faith and some pretty harmful behaviors during her middle school years, she started to find solace and growth through her church community, and it played a really big and crucial role during a pivotal time in adolescence. She pursued her passion for music, and because she was driven by her experience and what happened to her in her childhood, she chose to attend college in South Carolina, getting as far away from Illinois as she possibly could. And she chose in her undergrad studies to major in music therapy. There, she wanted to use music as a way to help others through that have maybe encountered things that Faith had encountered throughout her life thus far. It was also at college where she met her first husband. Unfortunately, their marriage turned abusive, both physically and emotionally, and it left Faith feeling trapped. She found refuge in her church community at the time, where a pastor and his wife gave her some really healing words and permission in her situation, and encouraged her to leave that abusive relationship and marriage. In the midst of her divorce, Faith met Alex, her husband, whose patience, her current husband now, whose patience and genuine care for Faith facilitated her healing journey. And now she is happily married to him, and they have 3 sons. Faith and Alex prioritize deep connections with community that share faith with her, and they walk alongside her. And so that's a bit about Faith and her story.
I love it. Faith, we're so happy that you, like I said, accepted this invitation, but that people are going to hear your story. I know I'm thankful that E's friends become my friends, and we can be friends and all the things. And so I'm so thankful that you're here and you're going to share your story. I know I've been blessed by it already, and I know our listeners will be as well. So let's just dive in. We start every episode with an icebreaker question. And I know you and E are both moms of 3 little boys. I don't have that pleasure yet. Maybe I'll get a little boy someday, but because I'm a girl mom, but I love being a girl mom. It's really fun. But I imagine raising boys, there's a lot of like superheroes and things like that. So my icebreaker question for you is, if you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
Such a good question. So I have 3 older brothers. Alex has 3 older brothers. Now we have 3 boys. So I've been about all the superhero stuff. Mine kind of immediately goes to being invisible. But then I was like, no, I think really what I would like to do is be like super strong, so that if there's any like evil or bad guy, you know what I mean? I can just take them out like Wonder Woman style. Just to be honest, I feel like I have maybe like a little hidden, that or Captain Marvel, inside.
I love that. I feel like both of those are mom responses though. Like, okay, so either I want to be invisible so nobody can find me when I need to get away, or the mama bear coming out on you like, don't mess with my people or my stuff because I will take you out. Like, don't play.
Yep. That's good, Faith. I didn't think about invisible. Maybe we could actually go to the bathroom in peace someday if we were invisible. So one of my favorite parts of the Come.Union podcast now, and the way that T and I are moving forward, is that we let our guests title our podcast. And so if you were to title our podcast, which you're going to, and title it the title of your story, what would that be?
I think I went back and forth on this, but I think just the best summation would be Healing After Heartache.
That's good.
Yeah. That is really good.
I think I should clarify too, by healing, I don't mean like I am fully healed and whole, like done, because I believe in like it's a process, ongoing always. But there's also significant places, right, along the journey of healing. So I've come a long way.
So basically, you already have a superpower of strength, is what you're telling us. That's what it sounds like to me.
I'll take it.
Okay, well then let's dive into your story, sister, and let's hear about your journey of healing and the healing that's still yet to come. So my first question for you is, Faith, you had quite a childhood, as we talked about in your story so far, with the dynamic between your parents and your siblings, and specifically the dynamic between your mom and your dad. And your dad had some really interesting and harmful beliefs. And so my question for you is, how did you see those beliefs play out in your family growing up?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say. But I think to summarize, there were just a lot of things I think that were misinterpreted, that for myself, having read the Bible now and getting to this point in my life, I can see how it's easy to like take one verse, take one teaching and just go off, not pay attention to the verse right after it, not pay attention to the other 6 books that speak on this topic that are in the Bible. So there was just some belief systems, some theology that I really don't think was healthy. And it absolutely influenced how my dad interacted with my mom, what the dynamic was like in our home, how, he treated us kids, and just in general, how he viewed God, and then in turn, like tried to teach that, I think, that just wasn't accurate, honestly. And so it was hard. It prompted me to be like, okay, doesn't seem right. Like, I'm going to go read this for myself, and I'm going to go ask someone else about what this actually means. So it prompted like this curiosity in me, which I think was really key at the age that I was, even when I was a young child and like a preteen.
I love that you talked a bit about like the relationship with your dad and like the role he played in your house and in your family. And if you listen to this podcast, all of you out there that do, I hope a lot of you, you would know that like I had a complicated relationship with my dad, and it really shaped how I viewed God. And so I'm always so interested when I learn about people's family dynamics and when I learn about their childhood and their upbringing, especially a child's relationship with their dad. How did your view or your relationship with your dad shape your view of God and or your relationship with God growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was really blessed that I had other godly men and women in the church that I attended when I was a child, middle schooler, teenager, to kind of have this comparison, right? Because I really struggled with, my dad interprets the Bible or this passage this way, authoritative, like, because I said so, you will respect me, like XYZ. God hates these things, just kind of almost really legalistic, right? There wasn't grace. There was kind of like, where's the gospel in all this? And, as I started to read the word for myself, it really prompted me like that curiosity. I just became more and more convinced. I'm like, hang on. The God of the Bible is not how you're acting. So I really just started to see this contrast like more and more and more. And so for me, I think a lot of people struggle, and I did as well. Like, I don't have a right view of God based on my earthly father. If anything, I feel like, and that's not to say that he's like a horrible person or there were no good qualities in him or anything like that, because I absolutely believe in grace upon grace. But I definitely think from like a fatherhood perspective, oh, okay, you believe this? Well, then it's probably not the truth. So this opposite, just being honest, like God is patient. He is loving. He is kind. He is generous. He is, all these things that I didn't see tangibly in my own father. Even going back to or flashing forward, even though it's been quite a few years now, to like the last time I chatted with him in person. And I really, as an adult, like laid this out there. Jesus is gracious. He is kind. We all need forgiveness. That's why he came to the earth, and just kind of sharing with him my belief system. And it was incredibly evident that it was so far from his belief system. It was just very, very, like in an odd way, confirming for me of my own faith and how God has been faithful to me, I feel like, from the time I was a child. And I've just always had this picture of him that's been different from my earthly father, if that makes sense.
Wow. That's to think at such a young age, you had the like maturity and the curiosity, like the Holy Spirit pricked you enough to say, like, go ask the question or go seek. I think there's so many adults that don't even know to be like, well, let me go find the answer for myself, or let me go understand the character of God. And the fact that you got to experience that so young is incredible. But you did talk about these pastors that you said, or godly men and women that were in your life. And it seems like despite what your dad was showing you or what he believes to be true about God, I love the fact that you didn't just walk away or just like throw away religion or walk away from God. Like, I want no parts. And because of that, you continue to go to a church. You found these pastors that poured into you. Talk to me about the role of those pastors in your life. What did they teach you about God, and how did they really help to shape your view that you've carried on through your adult life?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's gonna be, I'm not gonna cry in the podcast. Okay, no promises.
Okay, you can cry. You're welcome here.
Right? Come as you are. I love it. But yeah, I'm so grateful. The pastor of the church, really where I attended from like 4th or 5th grade on, right? So 9 or 10 years old. That's where I attended all the way to when I was 18 and left home and moved away. So a good decade. And the lead pastor and his wife, just humble, Jesus-loving people who I truly believe with his whole heart, the pastor wanted to preach the truth. The youth pastor and his wife at that church, same, very humble, down-to-earth people who had children of their own. Most of them were grown, and then they had one daughter who was a few years younger than me. But they just had a passion for loving the youth in our community. And I remember at one point, I feel like our youth group grew to like 100 kids. I mean, it was way more than kids that would come to church on a Sunday morning, because our church was only about 400 people probably. And so to have a youth group that's that large, I mean, there was just such a special community. And I don't mind sharing the name of the church, but because I love it, actually. It was called Community of Faith. And this is, that's just where I grew up. That's where I was really received a lot of the early teaching. And that doesn't mean it was, 100% accurate necessarily, right? Because we're all human and we're all learning. But I think the foundation of my faith was really laid there. And there were things that I was encouraged to do. Like I had the freedom when I was furious with my dad, something he had done, to go to my youth pastor and be like, how do I deal with this? Like, I can't stand, 15-year-old, 14-year-old, like, I can't stand my parents or whatever. And just the response of, you have to forgive them. We are called to forgive. If we love Jesus, that means for extending forgiveness, even if it's never asked. And just about how the effects of unforgiveness in my own heart and the bitterness in my own heart, what that would do to me and to my faith. That pure faith and that pure teaching, I think, with no hidden agenda behind it, was very powerful.
Wow.
That's amazing.
I'm so grateful for mentors and people who step into our story. Like I think about that, Faith. Like, I'm so grateful for those people who stepped into your story and showed you what it looks like just to deeply love people. Yeah. I resonate that with too. Like, if a young life leader hadn't stepped into my story, how much different even if I would believe in Jesus. And so, I relate, sis. I think that's incredible. And how healing that is to have those people step in when there's a hurtful relationship going on between you and your dad.
Absolutely.
You leave Southern Illinois and you move to South Carolina to go to school for music therapy. And you're trying to get as far away. So tell me about what that was like, your first time being apart from your family, leaving what you knew in Illinois, and then how your experience in Illinois influenced how you chose to spend your time when you got to college in South Carolina.
All right. Well, I would say, first of all, I have this memory of when I was 10 and my oldest brother was 18 and left for college. And he went to a small private school in northwestern Pennsylvania, but also about a 12-hour drive away from where we grew up. And I remember looking out my bedroom window and thinking, Okay, I just have to make it to 18 and then I can leave. So that was when I was 10. I don't even know if I've really shared that with anyone before, actually. But that's a very distinct memory of mine. And so I always kind of had it in the back of my mind, okay, I'm going to get out. I'm going to like start my life as an adult. And not to say I really feel like God protected me again, like in the community that I was a part of. I had great friends. I even remember one of them, though. I had a friend that threw me a going away party the week before I moved to South Carolina. And it was so special. And she made me this book where my youth pastor, and I still have it, all of my closest friends wrote a note and we took a picture. This was back before iPhones and social media. And but one of my friends that night, he's like, Faith, you're going to leave and never come back. I was like, that's not true. And I'm like, wow. Oh, he knew it, So when we get to South Carolina, to Charleston, Anne was like, number one, when we had visited the school, it was February and there was snow on the ground in Illinois, and we got there and it was like 78. The pools were open. You know what I mean? I'm like, wait, yes. The beach is like 15 minutes from here. What? So I'm like, I'm sold. But no, I wanted to help people. I'm a classically trained pianist, and my teacher really wanted me to pursue performing, but I really wanted to help people. And so when I heard about music therapy, I thought, oh, what a great combination. I didn't really know a ton about it. A double major in psychology and music, very intense. And so I'm one of those people who put a lot of expectation on myself, and I'm like, I started this, I'm going to finish it. I was pretty focused. And as far as how that impacted, I definitely think I was excited to be out and away and on my own, but also I had the community that I did have that had really been kind of like my family outside of my family of origin was not there, right? So I definitely think trying to establish that when I was in college at first, there were some tough seasons, right? Which I think is normal for that age, but just really trying to gauge, okay, who's a safe person? Who's not? What do I want to be involved in? What do I don't want to be involved in? How do I spend my time? Who do I spend my time with? So it was definitely tricky navigating that.
Yeah. And so you're in college and you're meeting friends, you're figuring out what you want to do with your life. And then a normal thing that happens, right, when we're in college is like, oh, maybe I'll date someone, maybe I'll meet someone. And so talk to me a little bit about the start of that relationship, how that happened. And then we know from already telling a bit of your story that ended up becoming an abusive relationship. So were there warning signs after you met him?
Yeah. So when I first met him, it was, with a group of I went to a pretty small college. So I small group of international students, and kind of became friends with them and involved in that group with a few other people. And it was great just being friends. We'd go salsa dancing on the weekends. And one of my good friends in particular, she and I were like, hey, if we can really befriend a lot of these people, I think we could have the opportunity to share our faith. And so I definitely think my involvement with him and with that group of people was positive intentions from the get-go. And that was just how things went for a few months. Flash forward to middle of my sophomore year, and he was like, what happens if my student visa doesn't get renewed and I can't come back in the spring? And just, oh my gosh, what if I never, because I cared about him, after being friends for, I don't know, most of a year. But definitely didn't have intentions with dating. I had invited him to a campus worship service that I led worship at, and he had come to faith along with a couple other friends in that group. When he said that, what about not coming back? We kind of, I don't even remember the specifics, but there was a conversation where, oh my gosh, I can't imagine my life without you. Should we start dating? And it just kind of evolved from there. And that was right before Christmas break. And I'll never forget, we were dating basically, but I remember thinking whoa, how is this going to play out? And then he came back. We're pretty serious, I think, from the moment after that, month separation. So he got everything approved, came back and had another semester or two, I think, before he graduated. I wouldn't say the first few months, maybe a few months in. There were definitely some things that happened where I was like, whoa, I don't know about this. And I feel like every time that happened, it was, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to do that. you know that I don't actually feel that way. I love you so much. Things will be different when XYZ happens, or really gaslighting started then. And also, you know, just that cycle of, but did that really happen? Or did I really say that? You know, I didn't mean that. There was even like some destruction of property that would happen from time to time. Looking back, I'm like, man, how could I not have like ended things right then and there, right? But I'm also on this side of my story, and I was a different person at that point. So yeah, that's how our relationship started. One thing that strikes me now, on this side of that experience and that marriage and everything, is on paper how different my earthly father and my ex-husband looked, right? Like I have an American, like hunting, very legalistic, Christian, good person in his eyes. And then like this Latino, athletic, but the commonalities between them and how this was later on, I really started to recognize, oh, okay, a couple of things. Like I'm used to taking 100% responsibility for those relationships, for there any substantial part of a relationship there, for example. And yeah, just kind of recognizing those on this end was for sure like eye-opening to see, okay, what was not similar between them, but was similar, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So you talk about like meeting him and dating, but he's now your ex-husband. So at some point there was a proposal. He asked you to marry him.
Oh, yeah.
It was you were pretty young, still in college. Like,
Yeah.
what made you say yes? Like, why did you marry him?
Yeah, there was a lot of manipulation that happened. I mean, from, well, if you don't do XYZ, we're not going to be together. Like he convinced me to buy a home together. At the time, he didn't even have a green card. He was working with a working visa. So it wasn't like a guarantee thing, right, that he could stay in the United States even. So there were all these kind of things I'm like, well, okay, shoot. So we closed on this house, which I didn't live in before we got married, but he did. Man, if I call it off, what happens now? Like I'm 21 and working 3 jobs and a full-time college student. I think I started to slowly get like in over my head and felt like there was no way out even before we got married. I was kind of the one that was like, okay, if we're going to be together, like we're going to get married. I think I definitely struggled with the purity culture and things like that. And that I had really been ingrained in me from a young age too. So I struggled with guilt from just his and my relationship and felt like, okay, this is the right thing to do.
Oh, girl, I understand that, Shane. That's so real. I remember I came to faith in college and didn't have any spiritual, religious, anything background. And I remember my first introduction, and I joined this ministry, and it was a women's ministry for young students. And there was very much a Jesus is my boyfriend kind of air. And I was like, well, I don't know about y'all, but I don't want him to be my boyfriend. He could be my homie. He could be my father. All the things we could talk about. But boyfriend? I don't know. That might be a little too far. I like boys. Like I do. So I'm just saying. But I understand. But I understand that shame and that pressure, and especially like being a young woman and what that could rise up in you. But when you're talking about this man, this Papi Chulo that has wooed you and wowed you, you get married to him. You guys own a house together. You're in this marriage, but he's your ex-husband. So you eventually left. But what made you finally leave?
I mean, I can't even tell you the number of times the week before our wedding thinking I should call this off. And I didn't. I think I had so much in my mind by that point, like this is my way out of my family of origin. This is my start. He says things are going to be different. I even remember honestly leaving our wedding reception and thinking, why did I do this?
Oh,
so it's not like there wasn't moments. I mean, like 2 months into our marriage is when he physically hurt me for the first time, not just like destroying my property. So I definitely was like, whoa, what am I in? But I also was scared. And if you study, like the cycle of abuse it's really usually not a lot of times people you think. Things are not what they seem. And so I feel like for people who have not been involved in that, it's easy to say, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you just leave?" I remember times after we were married, like running out of my house into my car and locking the doors and having to drive away and him chasing me. Those are the type of things. And then like him later saying, I didn't do that, and it's just, there's this psychological component that even the healthiest of people can get trapped in. And so I think understanding that, especially as time went on, Alex, my sweet husband, praise God for him, multiple times since the time we were dating and been married, I think he puts it so well. He's like, you stayed in a bad situation much longer than you should have because you wanted your marriage to work so badly. And I'm like, you hit the nail on the head. So there were definitely moments from, again, like dating and early on in our marriage. Yeah, I remember like a week after our wedding too, going to church, chasing down this young adult pastor at the church we were at the time. Can we be in your small group? Like literally running down the hall. Because I told my ex, we're not going to make it unless we have like godly people around us. And, looking back, that's because the people that helped me get through my childhood were the godly people in my community, right? In my church. And so to me, that was like, oh, this is the answer. So I should just add that about 3 years into our marriage, that pastor's wife, I used to lead worship every single Sunday at our church. And it was a church plant. And she just like called or texted me and was like, hey, can you meet for lunch? Right after the Sunday morning service. And so I did. She didn't say why, which was a blessing. And she's like, I just feel like something was off in your spirit. Is everything okay? Like between you and your husband? And I was like, no. I don't even know exactly what had happened the night before, but some sort of where he'd like physically grabbed me and like hit my head up against the wall and screamed in my face. Clearly, as one should be, upset about it still the next morning when he's at church and I'm at church and I'm trying to lead worship and people have no idea and he's acting like nothing's happened. And that was years of that. So from that day forward, I told her and our pastor what he was really like. And he met with him. And from that point in our marriage, my ex-husband didn't put his hands on me again, but he would still destroy property, get in my face. What are you going to do? Tell him? And I would be like, yes. It was like more combative because I started slowly standing up for myself and saying, I'm going to tell on you, because that was a real big thing for him. He had this image. He was charming and funny and attractive. He would never do that. Is what he would portray to other people. So flash forward, I went back to college. I got a master's of education in counseling. And I ended up doing additional coursework and became a licensed professional counselor intern and got a job working as a mental health counselor. And it was really intense. I was at a college counseling center. I was also fresh, new, but just really seeing clients that were struggling with some really difficult things, and a lot at one time, a lot of clients. So I had that going on, and things just got really combative in my personal life and at home. And there was one night where my ex threatened to shoot me with a firearm we actually had in our apartment. And I said, for a girl that just being honest, doesn't use 4-letter words, I flipped out. And I think for the first time in my life, I might have scared him with what I verbally said. And obviously, this wasn't out of nowhere. We'd been married over 6.5 years by that point.
Wow.
So it's not like we hadn't tried counseling it. There wasn't a desire from him to change, right? So there wasn't real work being done, if that makes sense. And so, from that night on, I said, I won't be alone with you again unless, you see a psychiatrist, we go to a counselor, and we meet with our pastor. I had all these criteria, and we were separated, I think, 3 or 4 months. And there was a lot that happened in that time too, which we don't need to dive into the details, but it was a really, really stressful time in my life and a turning point. And I found out when he tried to overdose that he had been having an affair with someone who she and her husband, I thought, were friends of ours in our church. So on top of all this that I've gone through for years, And I really tried, I feel like with the best intentions, to keep things private outside of those who needed to know, out of a desire to not slander, a desire to honor. My intention is not to blast anyone on social media or wherever. Like a lot of people don't need to know certain details, and that's fine. But there were also things that really needed to be brought into light that people who were around us thought they knew and they didn't. So a lot came to the surface then. Fortunately, and I can say this, having been a former mental health counselor, there was a lot of treatment that would have really benefited my ex-husband, but he didn't really think he had a problem. Or if he did, it was for, a short season, for example. He wouldn't take his medication regularly, things like that. I don't think his mission in life was just to harm me, for example, but that doesn't make what he did any less valid. And that doesn't mean that I needed to stay. So I do think once that affair came into light, I felt like, and the person who told me about the affair was my pastor in the chapel outside the ICU. So it's like this traumatic day of my life. I'll never forget. It was Cinco de Mayo. And I was supposed to be at a Kentucky Derby party with old work friends. And I was texting them, I'm not going to make it. I don't know when I'll see you again. I don't know what's happening with my life. But it was just profound. We had seen a counselor, a biblical counselor, a couple of times. And apparently my ex had told him about his affair. And the counselor had told my ex, you will either tell Faith by next week or I will. And so he says that he did that because he didn't want to tell me the truth. But in reality, we had his text messages later, and it's because the woman ended the affair with him. No matter the reason, but again, just patterns of the lies were continuing even then. God told me, this is your out. And I remember chatting with my pastor in that biblical counselor's office, who really wanted me, this biblical counselor wanted me to stay with my ex-husband. And my pastor, I was just I cannot. No, I'm done. And I was sobbing, but I remember my pastor looking at me and he's saying, Faith, it's okay. It's okay to be done. That's why in scripture, divorce is allowed for certain reasons. And he's like, you have more than one of those reasons. He said that moment where I feel like I didn't have my family of origin to fall back on in a lot of ways. My brothers and my mom, I know, absolutely love me, but it's just different, right? There's not an established ability for them to take care of me financially. They're far away. And so that church family for me, I think having that permission from my pastor was, okay, a deep breath. I can move forward. I don't know what my life's going to be like. It's not going to look how I thought it's going to look, but there is hope. I don't have to be with him anymore.
So you leave him once and for all, and you're given those incredible words from that pastor that it's okay. And it's you needed that permission. And so you embark on a journey of healing. And I want to hear about that journey. What did your journey of healing look like? How did you heal from the trauma of that? What was the role of community that played in that? You had lots of people involved in the midst of all of your marriage with him. So what did that look like as you healed with them?
It was messy. I think anyone who's been through a divorce, particularly, we did not have children, and I thank God pretty much every day when I look at my boys for that. But it was messy. There were a lot of people that he had deceived, who they thought they saw one version of him and thought that was who he was. And they had a really hard time believing that he had done certain things, even when there were obviously multiple people that confessed and admitted, this is what's been going on. So it was hard. I started therapy right away with a therapist I had seen a couple years before. And she had actually gone through a similar situation than me, only a few months earlier. And I do think that was really helpful.
Wow.
Seeing her at least once a week for a year was very impactful and very important. But that was a hard season. My pastor at the time and his wife were a big blessing to me. But there were even people within my community at the time that really didn't agree with me divorcing my ex-husband. And that had a lot more to do with their own issues than with me. But they were projecting that on to my situation. So even though as a therapist, I know why they were doing that, it was still really hurtful. Like people I'd known for years and taught their child guitar lessons for 2 years. Sacrificially, I had loved their family, and just for them to say, I don't believe in divorce for any reason other than death. Thanks for sharing your belief with me.
Wow.
I'm not some stranger. Like, I'm like your sister. You can feel that way, but that doesn't impact my decision. It was hard for me to have that posture and to not become bitter or angry, and I just had to continue to work through and see like, okay, God, give me your eyes to see people, because trauma tends to bring up, and hard things I know tend to bring up things in people's lives. And sometimes it's easy for them to put them off, on whoever's going through it. So I feel like I thank God that I had, I think, a good view, like a healthy view, after having worked through so much of my own unforgiveness and bitterness as a kid. Maybe I got here we go again. You know what I mean? Like, but at the same time, I felt a little jaded in that season. I don't know what life's going to look like or who's going to be there for me or not, but I can say without a doubt, something that I feel like God built up in me in that season was trusting Him more than even any faith community that I was a part of. And that was really freeing.
Yeah.
That's good. So Faith, let me ask you this. How you talked about getting married because you felt the shame of the purity culture that you had been a part of, and then you get a divorce, and you said like there were people in your life that you were close to that didn't agree with you and kind of looked at it, and so it seemed like there was like a lot of religion or rules. You grew up with a legalistic dad, like a lot of this was happening, and yet you did make choices. And my question to you is like, how did you reconcile? How did you forgive yourself and know that you are loved by God despite any of the rules or the religion that was being thrown at you at the time?
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, there were seasons. I remember, even particularly when I was separated from my ex, so before I found out about it as a affair, et cetera, where I just, again, I've led worship since I was 12. And I would like open my mouth on a Sunday morning to try to sing. Like I had stepped down from leading worship probably like 4 or 5 months before I split from my ex. So it had been wild, and even a while. And that was weird. I would open my mouth and I couldn't sing. Like nothing would come out, and I would just sob. And I just felt like this disconnect for a while from God. But I think it was really profound for me too to realize, okay, my whole life I've claimed that I needed forgiveness just as much as anyone else. But I really truly felt the feelings of guilt and shame and things that I had done just came to the surface, and I was like, thank you, Jesus. Now I've been saying it, but now I truly can receive it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I think growing up in the church, it's easy to have the Sunday school answers. One of my pastors would always say, "Oh, my kids have boring testimonies," and I'm like, I get it. And I do think there are people that there are people that probably look at me. I know that there are, because they've said that I've met that don't know me, and they're like, "Oh, I would have never thought," And I actually kind of take that as a compliment. I'm like, "Oh, you would have thought I had a boring testimony? Thanks. Glory be to God, like I have healed,"
Yeah.
Because that's a mess.
I feel that. I will definitely. I mean, I can't lie. When I first met you, I'm like, I'm interested to hear what her story is, and then you hit me with a story, and I'm like, oh, girl, like I've been through some of those things. I can understand. You're a therapist, right? Like a licensed therapist, and especially at the time you're going through this, you're helping other people walk through their grief and their trauma. How did that impact the work you were doing? How were you even helping other people deal with what was going on in their life in the midst of your own?
Yeah, so I should stop and say, so I worked at this college counseling center for a year. This happened where my ex was in the hospital. I took a week off. The next week, I went back to work for one day. I take that back. I was off work for a week. The next week, I went on a cruise that I had booked 6 months earlier with some coworkers. And the day after the cruise, I got back to work. I don't even think I've shared this with you, Erin. And I literally got there and the students were gone. Praise God. Like I didn't have anyone I was counseling. Yeah. Because school had happened to get out like a few weeks before this. But I literally remember I'm standing at the copy machine and I'm like, God, I cannot do this anymore. By the end of the day, I had an interview set up for the next day. And by 2 days later, I had my first interview. By the end of the week, I had a job offer to work for a proprietary educational institution where I worked for 5.5 years. To your question of how did I decide to leave, like I really do feel like my education as a counselor, like it opened my eyes, and there was a level of empowerment I think I had by recognizing his patterns of behavior where I could see the diagnostic criteria for certain things. And I'm like, ooh, okay, this is definitely not just in my mind, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine being a therapist and you're living out this traumatic story and you're learning about how to counsel people through their trauma, and you're living it in the same moment.
Yeah.
And that must have been, I mean, like you just said, that was crazy because it helped you in a lot of ways recognize what you internally knew, but it was putting language to it. But then to have to go and live that out and counsel others. Wow. I have such great respect for you, my friend, in the midst of that. So there's beauty and goodness to your story. And I want to jump into the healing parts of your story too. So you mentioned you went on a cruise, and on that cruise, something really amazing happened. You met your husband, Alex.
I sure did.
And that began a whole new journey of healing. So tell us a bit about what happened after you met Alex, and what did that journey being with him look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's another amazing. We could have an episode just about that. Oh, God's timing is perfect, right? Like there's no way I could have dreamed up or would have imagined meeting him when I did, and the timing and everything, or the fact that he would be so persistent. But yeah, I go on this cruise, and that's the other thing. I almost didn't go. And again, I remember my pastor saying, you need a break from your life. Go enjoy this.
I wish somebody would say that to me sometime. You
Right?
need a break from your life.
Yes, girl.
Best way to like say it in a sentence. Okay, the last few months of my life have felt like an episode of Jerry Springer.
That's real.
That's what I would tell people. And be like, so you don't really want to know. I promise you don't really want to know. But yeah, I met Alex on this cruise, and long story short, from the get-go, I was like, nothing's going to happen here, buddy, now or ever. Like, just go on and enjoy your cruise. Like, you seem like a nice guy. And yeah, he didn't take that answer. He's a very persistent person. So I'll spare you the details, but there's some funny stuff from that cruise where, like, the girls I was with, he's like, how am I going to find you if I don't know where your room is? I'm like, if you want to talk to me, you'll find me on this boat with like 3,000 people. And he would, like, every day.
I love it.
I loved him dearly. He told one of his best friends the night that we met, which was the first night of the cruise, and he went back to his room. He said, I'm going to marry that girl. And he knew I was still legally married. Like, I had to go through, I represented myself in court. So that's another whole, it was like a long process for all the hearings and things that had to happen. But yeah,
wow.
God's hand was just all over that. It was a good thing. We lived like 9 hours away from each other. Yeah, he was very persistent. He pursued me hard. I was straight up with him first conversation. This is what's going on. This is why, I'm not going to talk to you. This is what's happening in my life. And he's like, I just want to talk to you. I just want to get to know you. And I'm like, sure you do.
Yeah.
It's like, I have no patience at this point. But all that said to say, like, Alex is a huge part of my healing, like a huge part of how God used him. I think I remember too, not to keep going back to the cruise, but like the third or fourth night, we were walking around after dinner, and he's like, can I hold your hand? Because that's pretty much all I would let him do.
That's so cute.
I'm like, sure. I feel like I'm at like a middle school dance, where we're walking around this cruise boat, letting this strange dude hold my hand. And one of the girls I was with had met a guy at, like, I don't know, the previous day playing volleyball. And so he met us up with us, and we were playing cards. And he's like, how long have you guys been married? Meaning me and Alex.
No.
Yeah. And I just looked at him and I'm like, we met like 3 days ago on this boat.
Wow.
Oh, well, girl, good love will do that. Good love will
And
do
so
that. Good love
in my
heals.
all right, God, thank you for giving me a reminder, like a picture of what it means to be treated with respect and kindness and not expecting anything in return.
Yeah, I guess like my question is just like, how did you get to a place like you met him in probably one of your hardest, darkest seasons?
Yeah.
How did you get to a place where you were able to trust and love and even pursue marriage again?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because, and I've told a few people this, but like Alex and I went through it because I said, listen, dude, I have some hard work to do. I'm going to go back to Charleston. You're going to be in St. Pete, which is great because I really don't have the bandwidth in my life to like have a relationship right now. He's like, I respect that. I would just, can I text you from time to time? Can I call you? I was like, yeah, but I might not answer. Like that's just where I was at. And he was okay with that. He didn't stop pursuing me, right? But he like was willing to do that. And so I was in therapy, but even down to the practical things, I was like nervous until everything was completely finalized, even to be like seen in public with him. So months later, if he came in town to visit, I'm like, you walk like, 6 feet away from me. This is a few years before the pandemic, but I'm like, you're over here.
Distancing.
Over here.
Man, that would have come in handy with some guys, back in the day, but whatever.
Listen, it would have helped me with my purity culture if they stayed that far. Well, yeah, baby, listen. But anyways, moving on.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I did some crazy stuff when we were like, I guess technically dating. And that's the thing where I'm like, oh, you want me to trust you? You'll give me your email password. And he was like, okay. And I'm like, what? He bore the brunt of a lot of like anger and rage that I had just in general. And he just still wanted to pursue me. And I think it was totally God. Flash forward a year later, my divorce has been finalized and he's like, I think I'd like to pursue like getting a job in Charleston. And I'll never forget, I went to my counselor, my therapist, and was like, I think I'm going to break up with him. Yeah, I did. I'm like, really? I was serious. She's like, why? And I'm like, he's moving here for me? No. When you're long distance, it's easy to have like one view of someone, but it's different to see them on a day-to-day basis and how they interact with their coworkers and your friends. And I was like, yeah, that's true. I'll give him a chance. So I didn't break up with him and I didn't tell him that for years. But,
wow.
Yeah, he moved to Charleston. We had to get my house ready to sell that I had owned with my ex, ripping out landscaping, painting it from top to bottom. And I was like, well, after, we both work 40 plus hours a week. That's what we're going to be doing this whole week, the evenings and weekends. He's like, all right. And he just was so happy to be there and to serve me in that way. And I just remember being like, what? Because I've told you so many times, like, I know you want to get married and have kids, but I'm not going to be there for a long time. So, just I think his patience and his persistence and his intentional pursuit of loving me well, one of the greatest parts of my story.
It just makes me think like, in 1 Corinthians 13, when you talk about love, and I'm like, God, the more I grow up and get older and experience life, I understand why the first word that love is described as is patience. It takes a lot of patience to love a broken person, and we're all, have our own brokenness, our own trauma and stuff. And so to experience the type of love when you feel like you don't deserve it or you're not ready or you don't even believe you're worthy of it, I mean, gosh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and then Faith, you go on to marry Alex because you chose to trust him. How would you say in hindsight today, like Alex and that marriage and just where you're at today?
One of the light bulb moments in my relationship with him was, I think, the first time he said, I'm sorry. And it was probably over something silly that he really didn't even say sorry for at that point, honestly. Because I don't think he did anything to really annoy me until after we got married. But it was just this revelation of, oh, you'll take responsibility when you do something that's wrong. That was like a light
Isn't
bulb
that sexy
moment
though?
for me.
That's kind of cute.
Right? But I also
Yeah.
realized I had never heard those words in my previous marriage, not once. Not I'm sorry. One of my former counselor supervisors said something with me that stuck with me. Scars don't bleed. Wounds bleed. And I thought, she's like, you can try to
say that one more time. I need to write that one down.
Scars don't bleed. Wounds bleed. And she talked about how we can try to put Band-Aids over things, right? But you take that Band-Aid off and it's just that pain is still there. But scars tell a story. And I thought, man, that's powerful, because for many years, I was working through that hurt. And then I don't know, I just feel like really through probably my marriage with Alex, that's the biggest thing where I'm like, wow, I don't even think about, and it's not like I've not processed or I'm trying to avoid the past, but I'm like grateful almost in a way for my scars, right? Because they make me value what I have now in such a different way than I ever would have appreciated my husband and my children.
Woo.
Wow.
Girl. You better put the exclamation point on that. I love that. What a beautiful story of reconciliation with God, self, and others. Like, you truly like embody exactly why we started this, exactly why we've invited people to be on this podcast, to share their story in hopes that it can help someone else. And so we always close out with this series of questions with all of our guests. And the first one is, how would you define reconciliation?
I think I would define reconciliation as, for me, I think it's the freedom and peace that comes from forgiveness, even when there's not reconnection.
That's it. Because when we've talked about this before on some of our episodes last season, like sometimes reconciliation is just the peace that we experience. Like you're saying, Faith, it's not necessarily that the other party has tried to make peace with us. So that's to experience that peace regardless of the other person's response is really important. That's good, girl. That's good. Okay, so then where or with what or with who are you still wrestling with reconciliation right now in your life?
I think for me, it's I don't know, I would hope it won't always be, but for a while it's been my dad. Like I hope that things will look differently in the future than they do now. But also, one thing that was a big part of my story was learning boundaries, and what that actually meant for me was really hard to enforce those. So I kind of had to do like a pretty firm boundary with him as an adult. And those haven't been respected very well. So I hope that will change in the future. But it's still it's interesting because I don't think that I have unforgiveness in my heart towards him. So I'm grateful for that.
And boundaries are important. Boundaries are important. We talk about that in one of our previous episodes this season. It doesn't always mean that we have to reconnect or the relationship has to thrive, because it can just be we forgive and we hold our boundary, and that is fair. So quick hit questions. What do you think the Lord wants you to receive?
Confidence.
What do you think he wants you to release?
Probably shame. I think I've released a lot of shame, but I think that will always be something that I struggle with.
What do you need to be reminded of?
I think that I'm loved just as I am.
You are, girl. I love you. And I know Erin does.
Oh, I love you. I love you. I love Alex. I love your boys. Like let me tell y'all, I said in the beginning, I mean it, not just like the gift that faith, everyone needs faith in their life. They need a faith in their life.
No pun intended, but every pun intended.
No pun intended. Pun intended and not intended. But to just see the gift that her whole family has been to my family, like legit, John and Alex are obsessed with each other. They have a total bromance going on. It's really cute. You know, we started our first communion gathering in Florida, and Faith and her husband Alex are a part of it. I mean, it's just like we're doing life together, and I'm like so honored to get to do that. So, my friend, I want people to know how to connect with you and people to follow along with your life. And so where can people connect with you?
Yeah, like on Instagram. It's really lame. It's Faith Corley at Faith Corley. And same, I'm on Facebook, Faith Corley. I will say, part of my boundaries, I have my stuff set to private. So if you want to follow me, please do just send me a DM and say, I heard you on Come.Union. I'll be like, all right.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Me.
I know that people are gonna get so much from the hearing of your story. So thank you. There's so much of me like that wants to be like, I'm sorry you had to go through all that. And then when you were like, but scars are a story, I was like, yeah, like so thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I don't know, you want to close us out? Tell them to like us or follow us or all the things.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, if you've enjoyed this episode, or I mean, I'm sure you have, no doubt, just make sure that you like us or give us 5 stars, and make sure wherever you're listening or watching the podcast, would you please hit that subscribe button just so you can stay up to date with when new episodes come out. But Faith, once again, thank you for being on this episode. I love you, friend. I'm so grateful for you. And T, you want to close us out?
Let the reconciliation begin.
Thanks so much for listening today. Want to stay up to date with our episodes? Then subscribe to our podcast and newsletter on our website, Come.Union.com. Follow us on Instagram at Come.Union. Rather watch our podcast? Then subscribe to our YouTube channel at Come_Union. We are so glad you're a part of this community.